So, how do we take power from people? I spent several years researching every civilization that's ever existed on planet Earth and went back to the beginning of writing. Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley. Today that's Iraq. And the first records, Nimrod, Tower of Babel, then the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Neo-Assyrian, Neo-Babylonian, and the 2,000 years of Egyptian pharaohs, and 5,000 years of Chinese emperors, and kings of Assyria, and Babylon, and Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, till then. The most common form of government in world history is kings, and as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger because of military advancements, until finally the King of England had the biggest. America's founders broke away and flipped it and made the people the king. So it's a polarity change in the flow of power. Instead of top-down rule by kings, it's ruled bottom-up by we. It's the difference between a dead pyramid and a living tree, where every root and every little capillary root helps suck in nutrients to help keep this tree alive. So the bottom-up form of government. Where did our founders get the idea? From the New England pastors. Where did they get it from? The Bible. What part of the Bible? That first 400-year period when Israel came out of Egypt, before they got King Saul. It's called the Hebrew Republic. Anyway, with that introduction, the most common form of governments are kings, and democracies and republics are attempts to take the power of a king and give it to the people. Now, what's the difference between democracy and republic? Democracy, demos means people, kratos means rule, and in Athens there were 6,000 citizens. The word citizen means co-king. Right? So kings have subjects who are subjected to the king's will. Democracies and republics have citizens. The word citizen means co-king, co-ruler, co-sovereign. And so you're a citizen, you're a co-king. Now in a democracy, every citizen had to be at every meeting every day to talk about every issue. And if you didn't keep up with what they're talking about today, you don't know what's going on, you're called an idiotus, an idiot. Well, a republic is where you take care of your family and your farm, and you have someone in your place that goes to the market every day and talks politics. They are your representative. Easy to remember, the REP in republic is the same REP in representative. So a Republican form of government is a representative. You're the king, but you're just simply, you've delegated this to a representative who's your public servant that's going to go and carry out your will so that you can take care of your family and farm. Well, now, if republics and democracies are taking the power of the king and giving it to the people, the citizens, what if the king wants the power back? Does he just go to the people and say, hi, I want to be king, give me complete control of your life? Oh yeah, sure, here you go. Is that how it works? No. People are sort of hesitant. So there's two ways in which kings can take the power back. One is fear. When people are afraid, they will trade freedom for security, and the other is free stuff. The king's so nice, he's giving you free stuff, and then you get dependent, and then he begins to yank the chain. It's sort of like a drug dealer takes over a neighborhood two ways. He can come in with guns and shoot and get people in fear, and they'll trade their freedom just for security, not getting killed, or the drug dealer can give away free drugs. He's so nice, and then everybody gets hooked, and then he says, oh, you want some more free drugs? You're going to sell yourself into prostitution and rob from your neighbor. It's like a hunter gets animals through guns or bait. I was reading on the bait part. You know how to catch wild pigs? You put a post in the ground and throw some corn down. And the pigs come and eat the corn, ignore the post. The next day there's two posts. The next day 3, 4, and you start putting them in a little semicircle and then put the fencing in between. And the pigs come and just happily eat the corn and sort of ignore what's going on. And then finally you got it into a little semicircle where all there is the opening. And the pigs like squeeze through, eat the corn, and then you shut the gate and you caught yourself some wild pigs. And you're trapping them. So the scriptures are, fear of man bringeth a snare. Snare is a trap, right? So that's fear. But then the free stuff is, but every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lusts and enticed. And so the deep state big government creates or capitalizes on chaos and discord. Then in an atmosphere of fear promises a solution of free stuff. And so we're going to talk about the fear part. How do you create fear? You have to create discord. And the scriptures, Psalms 133, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Everybody say unity. Then Proverbs 6 says 6 things the Lord hates. And the last is he that soweth discord. Everybody say discord. We have unity, we have discord. Now, sowing discord has a long history. Could you imagine being in heaven and somebody sowing discord in heaven? Yes, that's Lucifer. He got a third of the angels to rebel. And then he's cast out, and he sows discord in the garden. Gets Adam to blame Eve, and then Cain to kill Abel. And so the first 400 years of Israel being out of Egypt, they didn't have a king yet. They were a republic. And they just, with Gideon, defeated 100,000 Midianites. I mean, there is no threat to Israel. They just defeated their enormous enemy. It's peaceful. Except Gideon has an illegitimate son named Abimelech. And Abimelech wants to seize power. So he's the first one on record to engage in critical race theory, identity race politics. What is it? He goes to the city of Shechem and he says, is it better for you that all the sons of Gideon reign over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. And his brethren spake of him in the ears of all the men of Shechem, with their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. So forget whether or not he's good at ruling. He's just one of us. We're identifying with his flesh, his bone, right? And then they go to the city's treasury, the temple of Baal-berith, and they take money from the treasury to hire protesters and rioters to commit violence. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, wherewith Abimelech hired vain and worthless persons, Antifa-type people, right, which followed him. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah and committed violence and slew his brethren. And then the men of Shechem made Abimelech king. So we got peaceful unity, and then we got somebody that's sowing division to take advantage of the division to seize power and make himself king. Now, Israel's republic would have ended here rather than a century later with King Saul, had not someone threw a millstone over the wall and it killed Abimelech. Well, let's go closer to the present. Italy, 500 years ago. It was a bunch of city-states, Venice, Genoa, Naples, Florence, Siena, and they all fought. And Machiavelli thought if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop the infighting. So he writes a book called The Prince, where he advocates the ends justifies the means. The end of one prince controlling all of Italy is such a good end, because it'll stop all the infighting, that any means necessary to get there is justified. Lie, cheat, steal. So if a prince wants to conquer a city, and the city doesn't want to be conquered, they would hate him. But if the prince pays criminals, like Abimelech did, to kill cows, burn barns, and create crisis and terror, the people will cry out for help. They'll want some governor to come along and fix this mess. And that's when the prince can come along, get rid of the very criminals he bribed to create the problem. Nobody will know the better for it, and everyone will praise the prince as a hero. So it's good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house and set it on fire, and then you go around the front of the house and sell them a fire extinguisher. And they'll pay anything for it and even thank you for being there. So it's called Machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on crises to consolidate control. You know that quote a little more recently with Rahm Emanuel. You don't ever want a crisis to go to waste. It is an opportunity to do important things that you would otherwise avoid. Or Hillary, I'm actually excited about this opportunity, this crisis. The chief of staff of President Obama is an old friend of mine and my husband's, and he said, never waste a good crisis. That's what we're trying to do. Ben Domenech, Fox Primetime, the authoritarian left is using the permanent pandemic to achieve as many ends as they can imagine. This is Rahm Emanuel's famous dictum, never waste a good crisis. Normal times don't produce the outcomes that the authoritarian left wants, because people are not scared enough to give them the limitless power they crave. Crises are necessary. And so, if there aren't any on offer, they manufacture them. So you and I see a crisis, our response is, how can we help people through it? They see a crisis, their response is, how can we usurp power through it? Henry Louis Mencken wrote in 1956, the urge to save humanity is almost always a false face for the urge to rule it. Reagan said one of the traditional methods of imposing statism or socialism is medicine. It's easy to disguise a medical program as a humanitarian project. What's he talking about? A healthcare crisis. You can seize power during it. It's something called seizing the moral high ground. Casinos do it, right? If a casino wants to come into an area and the area doesn't want one, they'll cite statistics of crime going up. But if the casino can give some money to schools, they can seize the moral high ground and say, we care about the children. And if you care about the children, you'll vote for casinos. And if you're not out there campaigning for more casinos, you must hate the children. So Reagan says this is what you do with the healthcare crisis. You say, unless you surrender your body to the state, You must hate the children. You must hate your grandmother. You're such a hateful person unless you give us complete control over your life. Here's a Daily Caller editorial cartoon, scientists looking through a microscope saying, it appears to be mutating into a totalitarian dictatorship. Reagan goes on, if you don't stop this, behind it will come other federal programs that will invade every area of freedom until one day we will awaken and we find we have socialism. So the response to usurpation is resistance. Every individual must say no. So we used to have national politicians that would hold back the floodgates of hell. But when a certain individual did what they called certify, which I don't think it was, then it ripped the umbrella. And now it's raining down on every one of us. And it's up to every school mom to push back, up to every local pastor to push back, every local sheriff, every local school board, every student. It's up to every one of us to push back because these national leaders let us down. Now, getting back on track with this idea of sowing discord to seize power. Lucifer sowed discord in heaven, right? Abimelech sowing discord in ancient Israel, Machiavelli sowing discord. Let's look at the British Empire. The British Empire became the biggest empire on planet Earth. 13 million square miles, 500 million people. There's only 22 countries that were never invaded or controlled in some way by the British Empire. Now, how did they get so big? Do you think they just walked into a country and said, hi, we're here to be the biggest empire in the world. Give us control over your country. Oh yeah, sure, here you go. You think that's how it happened? No. Let's look at how they took over India. In 1714, they landed in Bengal, which borders India, and they opened a trading post that turned into a trading fort, which turned into them having guns, which caused them to get involved in local politics and give guns to one kingdom and then guns to another kingdom and stir up ancient animosities between the kingdoms until it broke out into fighting and bloodshed. And when they beat each other up really good, the British would come in to restore order and they would take control of both. And they did this again and again and again until they took over all of India, a quarter of the world's population. And they tried doing that in America during the Revolutionary War. British General Johnny Burgoyne lands in Canada, and he comes down and meets with the Mohawk Indians, and he promises them money for scalps. So the Mohawks would go out in front of the British Army and scalp Americans, and come back in and do their scalp dancing. And this was so serious that it was mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. It says, the king has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Then the War of 1812, the British controlled Pensacola, Florida. Just north of that is Fort Mims, Alabama. And the Red Stick Creek Indians. You know the French pronunciation of Red Stick? Baton Rouge. And so the British go to these Red Stick Creek Indians and promise them money for scalps. And so the Indians take Fort Mims, Alabama, capture 500 people, and then scalp the ones they captured. Here's the historical marker. Here, Creek Indian War 1813-14 took place, the most brutal massacre in American history. Indians took the fort with heavy loss, then killed all but about 36 of the some 550 in the fort. Creeks had been armed by British at Pensacola in this phase of the War of 1812. Do we really think the British Empire cared about the Red Stick Creek Indians? No, they were stirring them up against the Americans because they wanted us to beat each other up because they wanted to take over the whole thing. Washington warned of this in his farewell address. He says, disorders and miseries, discord, right, gradually incline the minds of men to seek security in the absolute power of an individual, right? They'll trade freedom for security. Some governor that comes along promising to fix it, who turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. Jealousies and false alarms kindles the animosity of one part against another. Foments occasional riot and insurrection. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which finally facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passion. Washington, this is his farewell address. He's sort of saying goodbye. He says, let there be no change by usurpation. Usurpation is doing something you are not authorized to do, but people let you get away with it because you're telling them that you're doing it for their good. He says, encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all departments in one, and thus to create, whatever the form of government, a real despotism. Usurpation, though in one instance may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. This is a very important part of his quote. He says, an instrument of good, that means you have a leader coming along saying, I want to do something good. They may actually do something good, but in the process, they're usurping power. And he says, this is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. Some politicians saying it's an emergency, I got to take away some of your freedoms because I want to do something good. That's how you destroy a free government. He says, usurpation must always greatly overbalance in permanent evil any transient temporary benefit which the use can at any time yield. So the idea of creating crisis, seizing power, Germans like to sort of analyze things and turn them into equations, and so, anyway, I'm half German. So Hegel, Napoleon conquers Europe, 6 million die in the Napoleonic Wars. The king of Prussia, a German kingdom, said we can't get conquered that easy again. We need to strengthen the state. And so, there's a philosopher named Hegel, who teaches at the University of Berlin, who influenced Darwin, and who had a student named Karl Marx. Marx was a member of the Young Hegelians, a radical student group. And so Hegel came up with something called dialectics, Hegelian dialectics. It's a triangle. One corner is a thesis, the opposite corner is an antithesis or antithesis, and the top corner is a synthesis. It sounds complicated, but it's not. So Karl Marx applied this. The thesis is the status quo in a country. Everybody's used to the way it's been, right? You have to create an antithesis. You have to sow discord. You have to create a problem that's really bad. And then everybody will panic in fear and be willing to trade some of their freedom for security and settle for an answer that's just half as bad. Then that becomes the new starting point thesis. You create another antithesis, another crisis that's really bad, and everybody will give up some more of their freedoms, trade freedom for security to settle for an answer that's just half as bad. And then that becomes the new starting point. You create another problem that's really bad, and people will give up some more of their freedoms to settle for an answer that's just half as bad. And every time they settle, they're giving up a little more of their individual freedom to the state. And so Marx says, how do you create a problem that's really bad? You send in agitators, agent provocateurs, community organizers, labor organizers. Their job is to find people with grievances, stir them up to riot. And when the social discord gets bad enough, everybody will panic in fear and trade freedom for security. And so Karl Marx called it critical theory. And you observe a country and see all the groups, economically, religiously, ethnically, and you pit the groups against each other. Originally, it was critical economic theory, and you pit the proletariat, the working class, against the bourgeoisie, the middle-class business owners. We pit the poor against the rich, the blacks against the whites, the Catholics against the Protestants, the Muslims against the Christians, the Hutus against the Tutsis in the Congo and Rwanda. I mean, the people in the Congo saw themselves as one, but the Belgian and German colonizers came in and would measure their heads and their bodies and their features and say, you're a Hutu and you're a Tutsi. Then they would stir up animosity against them, and they'd even genocide each other, and then the colonizing power would say, well, we're going to restore order, and they would take control of the whole thing. I mean, they literally created racial distinctions where there were none before and used them for political purposes, stirring up animosity. It's called race baiting. Could you imagine the government breaking a country into groups and pitting the groups against each other just so they can seize more power? So Castro said the revolution needs the enemy. The revolutionary needs his antithesis, which is the counter-revolutionary. And if enemies were lacking, they had to be fabricated. In other words, you can't organize your people against nothing. You need something that's the enemy. And if there aren't any, you got to make them out of nothing. Like, white supremacists that want to take over everything. It's like, And Jesus had a scripture. If a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. So what we're talking about is an autoimmune disease to the body politic. What's an autoimmune disease? That's where your own body attacks itself. Your own immune system starts attacking your own organs. And so this is having it introduced into the body politic. You get the body to attack itself. So The idea is that patriotism is the enemy. You get people to identify with subgroups and then pit the subgroups against each other to cause division. FDR, 1942 says, remember the Nazi technique, pit race against race, religion against religion, prejudice against prejudice, divide and conquer. FDR again, 1940, whoever seeks to set one nationality against another seeks to degrade all nationalities. Whoever seeks to set one race against another seeks to enslave all races. The so-called racial voting blocs are the creation of designing politicians who profess to be able to deliver them on election day. Charles Barkley, CBS Sports, April 3rd, 2021, said, man, I think most white people and black people are great people. I really believe that in my heart, but I think our system is set up where our politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are designed to make us not like each other so they can keep their grasp on money and power. They divide and conquer. We're so stupid following our politicians. Their only job is, hey, let's make the whites and blacks not like each other. Let's make rich people and poor people not like each other. Let's scramble the middle class. I truly believe that in my heart. Malcolm X, 1963, said, the white liberal differs from the white conservative. Both want power, but the white liberal has perfected the art of posing as the Negro's friend and benefactor to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon in this political football game, and the white liberals control the ball. Right? So they're wanting to take advantage of the situation, but their goal is political power. Now, how did this begin to come to America? You had Pullman Railroad Car Company, Chicago, 1894, and economic downturn, they couldn't pay their workers. And so somebody named Eugene Debs, Bernie Sanders had his picture on the wall, he comes over and he sows discord amongst the workers that had grievances. And he got them to protest and riot and commit violence. And they rioted and caused $80 million worth of damage, which spread to 27 states. Could you imagine rioting and burning, going from city to city to city all across America? And since everything was shipped on railroads, the whole country's paralyzed. And then he starts the Socialist Party of America. Eugene Debs started it. He ran for president 5 times between 1900 and 1920, one time from prison. And then in 1920, branching off as the Communist Party USA. And they run candidates for president every year from 1920 to 1940. What happened in 1940? That's when Franklin Roosevelt made a treaty with Stalin during World War II, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics. And the Communist Party said, why should we run our own candidates? Let's just back Democrat candidates. And that's when they began to infiltrate that party. It's documented. Even Reagan said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, the party left me. Years ago, I met Zell Miller, the last pro-life Democrat senator. And he said, unfortunately, the National Democratic Party has been taken over by the very liberal, left-wing, leaning special interest groups in Washington. Right? So here you have a U.S. senator admitting that the party's been taken over. Now, lest we think they only want one party, in 1963, Congressman Albert Herlong read into the congressional record 45 goals and tactics for the communists to take over America, and one of them was capture one or both political parties. And others resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party, do away with loyalty oaths or pledges of allegiance. Now let's flip back over to Europe. We talked about Napoleon and Hegel, but now in the 1920s, Germany was a republic, the Weimar Republic. And somebody started a party called the National Socialist Workers' Party, and the head of it was Hitler. And this party had a violent, under-the-table arm to it, sort of an Antifa BLM type. They were called brown shirts. And their purpose was to sow division. And they were nicknamed Sturmabteilung, which means stormtroopers, because they would storm into the meetings of Hitler's opponents and disrupt the meeting and shout down the speakers and create mayhem. And then they would lock arms and block access to public buildings. Could you imagine people locking arms in public and like blocking things? And then they would block streets. And then they went into the cities and they smashed windows and looted and set on fire over 7,000 stores owned by Jews in the night of broken glass. And then their capital got set on fire, an insurrection. And evidence points to Hitler's own people setting the fire. And in the confusion, Hitler decides that he's going to do an investigation. And he's going to round up all the people that he rounds up all his political opponents. And has them detained forever. And then he has them shot without a trial. And when the dust settled, Hitler did not have any political opponents left. And Germany transitioned from a republic to a dictatorship. A similar thing happened in Russia, 1934. Stalin is facing a growing anti-Stalinist movement. And in addition, he has a supporter, a popular supporter named Sergei Kirov, party boss of Leningrad, who praises Stalin. They even have a statue to Sergei Kirov. He was a real popular guy. And so Stalin had an idea. He would have his friend Sergei Kirov assassinated, eliminating a potential rival. And he would blame the assassination on the anti-Stalinists. And everybody would believe that the anti-Stalinists did it because they didn't like Stalin and they didn't like Sergei. Stalin used that as an excuse to round up and investigate and kill over 1 million people in the first Great Purge. Erdogan did a similar thing in Turkey, right? There's an article, Erdogan staged a coup to silence his opposition. So there's this milquetoast coup that lasted less than a day, and when it's done, Erdogan pulls out a list of 30,000 of his political opponents. They get arrested and zip-tied and taken away and never been seen since. It was a staged coup against himself so that he could target and blame his political enemies and have them round up. You know, Tucker Carlson aired this video of the first people breaking into the U.S. Capitol. And they're all dressed in black.
I want you to pay attention to the first group of assailants as they break into the building. The second man through the window is wearing full tactical body armor and is carrying a baseball bat.
It sort of doesn't look like people that heard a speech and got riled up. Sort of looks like they had this planned ahead of time. And lo and behold, more is coming out about the FBI having operatives in the crowd and stirring them on as an entrapment. And these articles coming out that the magnetic doors around the Capitol open from the inside. I've been to the Capitol lots of times. They have to buzz you in. Those doors will not open from the outside. Somebody on the inside has to let you in. And there's 2,300 Capitol police officers. It's the most protected building in the world. Nobody goes in there unless they let you in. And then there's this guy, Ray Epps. And he's on video over and over again the night before saying, we got to break into the Capitol. We got to break into the Capitol. It's like, okay, it's big. And then he's on the list of people. And when, Tucker Carlson points this out, all of a sudden his name's taken off the FBI list. It's like, what happened to this guy? Why don't you want him? And so more and more evidence points into it being not a January 6th insurrection, but a January 6th coup. And something in politics is called psychological projection, where the attacker blames the victim, called blame shifting. Karl Marx accused others of what you do. And so this is, little kids do it. I'm not the mean one, you're the mean one. Or a wife beater will beat up his wife and say, it's your fault because you provoked me. Or a Sharia man will rape a woman and say, it's your fault because you tempted me. And so now it's gotten into politics. And David Axelrod was the campaign manager for the past president. And he said in Chicago politics, there was an old tradition of throwing a brick through your own campaign office window and then calling a press conference to say you've been attacked. So you do the crime, but you blame it on your innocent opponent. And so let's say there's a candidate running for president and they're colluding with Russia, giving away 1/5 of the U.S. uranium in exchange for a $145 million contribution to her Clinton Foundation. She wants to pay for a Steele dossier to accuse her opponent of colluding Russia. His name gets smeared with it in the media, and if it ever gets pointed back at her, by that time the water's muddied. The public doesn't know who to trust, and she gets a pass. Let's say there's another candidate running for president that's extorting Ukraine, saying, stop investigating my son or I'll hold back billions of dollars in U.S. aid. You want to accuse your opponent of extorting Ukraine. The exact crime you're guilty of, you want to blame them. And then you use the investigation process to subpoena all the evidence that can convict you and destroy it. laptops, hard drives, cell phones, text messages, servers, everything. And anyway, it's a very effective strategy, and it's used against you every day. You're divisive. Well, no, they're divisive, and they're projecting their divisiveness on you. You're hateful. No, they're the hateful ones, and they're projecting their hate on you. You're a racist. No, they're the ones, and they're projecting it on you. And you have to call them out on it. Because you can never back up enough. No, really, I'm not. No, so look, I didn't do it. No, you can never back up enough. And if they say weakness, it's blood in the water to sharks, they'll come after you even more. You have to stop, plant your foot, and say, no, you're the racist one. And you're projecting your racism on me. Throw it back at them. Now, let's look at after World War II. Germany is now defeated. But it weakened France and England, and so what they do, they give up their colonies around the world. And so Britain, France, Germany give up their former colonies, and so now there's brand new countries. India, Egypt, Israel, and you have countries like Bulgaria and Ethiopia and Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania and Hungary and all these countries, and they elect brand new leaders. And they're climbing out of the post-World War II crisis. It looks hopeful, except the Soviet Union decides to do critical theory. And they would send their agents in there, and they would observe all the groups, categorize them. Ethnically, Bosnians, Croats, Serbs. Religiously, Sunni, Shia, Orthodox. Racially, economically, it doesn't matter. You break them into groups and pit them against each other as victims and oppressors, haves and have-nots, until it caused rioting. And then they would co-opt the media with bribes and threats to blame the new leader of the new country for all the problems, and then they would nurture weak links in the military. And when the country gets panicky and confused enough, they would do a coup or a rigged election and replace the leader with a Soviet puppet. Country after country fell. It's called behind the Iron Curtain. During this time, you had Mao Zedong tweak it in the Soviet Union, in China, and rather than do the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and then after you take power, you sort of don't. No, his idea was you keep doing it. And you take the land from the rich, and then you take the land from the middle class, and then you take the land from the poor, and then you take the land from... So you finally you have a continuous, he called it continuous revolution theory. Sort of like a continuous pandemic, right? Oh, we got another variant, another variant, another variant. Now, Truman does nothing while all these countries are falling to communism. He thinks the United Nations he helped form will bring world peace. But the next president's Eisenhower. He says the United Nations is seen to be two distinct things to the two worlds divided by the Iron Curtain. To the free world, it seems to be a constructive form. To the communist world, it has been a sounding board for their propaganda, a weapon to be exploited in spreading disunity and confusion. So Eisenhower could do nothing or something. And he's faced with a problem in 1953. Iran sides with the Soviet Union. Their leader, Mossadegh, decides to nationalize the oil industry in Iran. And you think, big deal. No, wait a second. Britain has no oil fields. So in 1908, Britain formed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. You know it better as BP. British Petroleum is really the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And so when Iran seizes all the oil assets, Britain is having an oil shortage. And so they appealed to Eisenhower for help. And Eisenhower approves the first CIA operation to overthrow a country's leaders, Operation Ajax. The CIA operative on the ground is Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt. Expert in foreign languages, he goes to Tehran, and he recruits mobsters and gangsters and radical imams. And they stage protests and riots and attack mosques. And they co-opt the media with bribes and threats to blame Mossadegh for all the problems, and they find weak links in the military. And when the country gets panicky enough, they do a coup. They put Mossadegh under house arrest, lock him away for the rest of his life where he dies, and they replaced him with the Shah, who loved America because we put him in. And the CIA did the same thing in Guatemala in 1954, the Congo, Dominican Republic, Chile, and the Soviet Union did the same thing with Brezhnev and Khrushchev, helping Yasser Arafat to start the PLO for the purpose of sowing division in the Middle East. They don't want peace. And helping Castro to sow division, take over Cuba. And help Che Guevara to start FARC in Colombia and ELN in Bolivia. And then there's hundreds of coups and coup attempts in Africa. This is called the Cold War. And these tactics of how to take over a country are being perfected and perfected and perfected. You go into a country, you find all the different groups, you pit the groups against each other until it breaks out in domestic crises, and then you come in promising to restore order, but in the process you take away everybody's guns and everybody's freedoms and so forth. Now I thought it was interesting, Chris Matthews, in his last television appearance, he is speaking after a Democratic candidate debate where they're talking socialism, and he says, I remember the Cold War. I've seen what socialism is like, and I don't like it, okay? It's not only not free, it doesn't work. I believe if Castro and the Reds had won, there would have been executions in Central Park. That was his last time on TV. Isn't that interesting? Now, what's he talking about? Castro and executions? Well, Castro had an executioner named Che Guevara. And Che Guevara said, we executed many people by firing squad without knowing if they were fully guilty. I'd like to confess, I discovered that I really like killing. He goes on, blind hate against the enemy creates a forceful impulse that cracks the boundaries of natural human limitations, transforming the soldier into an effective selective cold-killing machine. And people without hate cannot triumph. So this is where you want to stir up hatred between the groups, because hatred is an emotion that you can manipulate. And then you have Saul Alinsky. He rode around with Al Capone's hitmen in Chicago, Frank Nitti. And so all they had to do was kill a few people, smash a few windows, the whole neighborhood would panic in fear and be willing to trade freedom for security and pay the Bob extortion protection money in order to be left alone. And so Saul Alinsky decided to apply this to politics. And Hillary Clinton did her senior thesis at Wellesley College on Saul Alinsky, and President Obama was with the Saul Alinsky organizers there in Chicago. Saul Alinsky said, the first step in community organization is community disorganization. Disruption of the present organization is the first step. The organizer's first job is to create the issues or the problems. The organizer must first rub raw the resentments of the people of the community. The organizer must stir up dissatisfaction and discontent, fan the latent hostilities of many of the people to the point of overt expression. The organizer polarizes the issue, helps lead his forces into conflict. He must search out controversy, for unless there is controversy, the people are not concerned enough to act. This is the politics we have been experiencing in America for the last generation. The intentional stirring up of hatred and crises, a group against group. Now, just as an interest side note, Saul Alinsky has an acknowledgement in the front of his book to Lucifer. Ben Carson's a friend of mine, and he spoke at the Republican National Convention. We got one candidate here, we got another candidate that supported Saul Alinsky, and so in his book he has a, here it is, lest we acknowledge, at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. Remember we started off that? Imagine being in heaven and somebody sowing discord. And so I thought it was interesting, you know, the devil, all the kingdoms of the world are ruled through fear, except where you have republics, which are ruled through the people having virtue. But the devil took Jesus to a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world, said, bow down and worship me. I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world for their mind to give. And they were delivered unto me, and I can give them to whoever I want. And you're like, that's pretty audacious of the devil to say all of them were given. When did he get them? When Adam sinned. Adam was in charge of the garden. We know that because he named everything. Naming means you have authority over. But the Bible says, to whomever you yield your members servants to obey, to him you are a servant. The moment Adam obeyed Satan, he was posturing himself as the obeyer, and the devil is the one being in charge. So the devil usurps power and rules through fear. Here's one of the Muslim sultans of Delhi, India, said, fear of the governing power is the basis of all good government. And so we go through and we see these crises, this domestic insurrection stirred up all across America. I was in Emporia, Kansas. A former state rep organized the whole city hall type area, their community meeting place. And they said, yeah, somebody had dropped a pallet of bricks off right where they were going to begin their peaceful protest, and there was no construction in the area. Just boom, just a pallet of bricks happened to appear. Talk to people in Dallas, talk to people all around the country. Wherever they were having these peaceful protests, there just happens to be a pallet of bricks dropped off. Tremendous amount of organizing. Where's the NSA? I thought they were monitoring everybody's phone calls. Didn't they know about this? Are they that clueless? Or did they know about it? And anyway. And then there's some areas where the people have had bad things happen and they forgive. And so they would import people from other countries that have a predisposition to rioting. Right? So they bring them in from the Middle East and different areas. Let's look at the COVID response. You know, the first thing was let criminals out of jail. Did you notice that? Was that sort of strange? It's like, really, you couldn't find anything else to do, just let them out? And then crime goes up. Duh, let criminals out, crime goes up. And then some people feel unsafe in the big cities and they move out. Who? Well, maybe those with families. Okay, they usually belong to one particular political party. Who's left in the city? Well, maybe more people dependent on government entitlements. They tend to belong to another political party. And then businesses are closed and looted and vandalized, and the police are defunded in order to stand down. So pro-business people move out of the big cities. Well, they tend to belong to that first political party. And then churches are shut down, and that's where a lot of social conservatives gather. And then kids who've been indoctrinated with Howard Zinn and 1619 and all this hate America stuff, they're let out of school to riot. You think, well, who would want to organize students to do riots? Remember this guy, Congressman Albert Herlong, reading into the congressional record in 1963, tactics the communists had to take over America. Here's one: get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and communist propaganda. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks. Use student riots to foment public protests. They've been planning on students rioting all the way back to 1963. Anyway, the net COVID response was more people of one political party move out of the big cities, leaving the other party with monopoly control of city politics. And in election years, whoever wins the big cities ends up winning the state. Whoever wins the state gets all the electoral votes from the state, and the president is elected by electoral votes. When you boil it down, there's only 6 counties in America. But they had to win those counties, right? You got Phoenix and Detroit and Philadelphia and Atlanta, they win those counties, they win the state. And they win the state. So all you need is 6 political machines in 6 cities, and you can win those cities, you win the state, get all the electoral votes from the state, and that's enough electoral votes to win the presidency. Anyway, so we talked about fear. When people are afraid, they'll trade freedom for security and give up but the other is the free stuff thing. And so let's look at Karl Marx, Frederick Engels, write the Communist Manifesto, and they said they were alchemists of the revolution. Their business consists in spurring it into artificial crises. Every new crisis must be more serious and more universal than the last. Every fresh slump must ruin more small capitalists. This will increase the number of the unemployed, and in the end, commercial crisis will lead to a social revolution. Why would you want to ruin small capitalists? Because socialism is a 2-tiered system of a ruling class and a ruled class. There's no room for a middle class. The middle class can pool their money and challenge the ruling class, so they want to get rid of them. And so this was a 1934 Chicago Tribune editorial cartoon. Got a guy looking like Trotsky writing, plan of action for U.S., spend, 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 under the guise of recovery, bust the government, blame the capitalists for the failure, junk the Constitution, declare dictatorship. Spend, spend, spend. What's that? That's $1 trillion stimulus programs and infrastructure programs that are not intended to stimulate and not intended to build the infrastructure. They're intended to create trillions of dollars out of nothing, chasing the same amount of goods, which is going to make those goods skyrocket, and everybody that's on fixed income is not going to be able to survive, and they're going to go to the government and say, help. And the government's going to say, here, we'll give you a check. And we'll get you dependent upon us. Oh yeah, and we're going to confiscate your retirement savings because you can't buy that much with it anyway. And we're going to say, oh, we just noticed that you haven't had your last booster. Well, you got to get that if you want the check. Oh, and we noticed that you got guns in your house. You got to give those up. And pretty soon you're going to have to give up all your freedoms to continue to get that check. And so it's called the Great Reset. They want to do it globally. We saw a little of this during the Depression. And you had FDR pushing through all of these power grabs, 3,000 mandates that he's ruling, executive orders. Did you know by one mandate, he outlawed the private ownership of gold in America? People were burying gold coins and coffee cans in their backyard. So after the New Deal of FDR, it's called the Great Society Welfare State of Lyndon Johnson. And they get the idea from Richard Cloward, Francis Piven, two Columbia University socialists, that says you can't take over America with tanks, but you can, if you go around the back door and get everybody dependent, and then you begin to tighten control. So it's called the Cloward-Piven strategy. Anyway, and I want to talk on one thing. So a communist that defected to America named Yuri Bezmenov, he says people think of KGB like James Bond. It was really a lot simpler. We just observe all the categories, all the groups. We do critical theory, and then you find the influences of these groups, and you pull them in a socialist direction, and then you begin to pit the groups against each other. Then you destabilize, that's the spend. Then you have a crisis, a riot that spreads across the country, and in the confusion you do your coup and rigged election. And but one of the things was infiltrate media, education, and the pulpit. So they began to infiltrate seminaries. And Albert Herman, we talked in 1963, infiltrate churches, replace revealed religion with social religion. Alexander Solzhenitsyn spent 11 years in gulags. I call upon America to be more careful, prevent those from falsely using the struggle for social justice to lead you down a false road. Somebody that was involved in this was Manning Johnson. Dr. Burns talked about him. He was a black man that became a communist for 10 years, even ran for Congress in New York as a communist. And then he saw how some black men wanted to have a hospital and have it be first class. It was Jews got hospitals, Catholics said, we would have a hospital. And he saw the communists undermine their whole effort. And then he said some successful black businessmen were wanting to build a real estate development, a neighborhood with fountains and shops and bridges, and have it be first class. He saw the communists firsthand undermining their whole project. And he came to the conclusion, you really don't want to help our people. You're just using us to sow division for your purposes. But he talked about how they originally wanted to go into the minority communities and do what they did in Russia. Get them to spit on the Bible and kick the Bible. And he says that they couldn't do it because the minority communities were too attached to the Bible. So their strategy was to change the gospel. And he writes, the new line went like this: Jesus the carpenter was a worker like the communists. He was against the money changers, the capitalists, the exploiters of that day. That is why he drove them from the temple. Communists are the modern day fighters against the capitalists, the money changers. If Jesus were living today, he would be persecuted like the communists. So forget the gospel, we're all sinners going to hell and Jesus died on the cross to pay for all of our sins. No, Jesus was just an activist. And so we begin to see this infiltration. In terms of even a recent article, George Soros was actually paying leaders to push this. And anyway. Now, we've all seen the little video of kids on a starting line, and the teacher says, if you're from a home with a mom and a dad, you have a special advantage, take a step forward. And if you're in a safe neighborhood, you've got a special advantage, take a step forward. Until pretty soon, some kids are way in the front, and other kids are still on the starting line. And the camera looks at their faces, and they're like, this isn't fair. And it's a pretty convincing video until you ask yourself the question, what's the finish line? Is the finish line how much stuff you can accumulate before you die and leave it all behind? Or is the finish line standing before God and Him saying, I was sick and in prison. Did you visit me? I was naked. Did you clothe me? I was hungry. Did you feed me? Whatever you did to the least of these, my brethren, you've done unto me. Yes, everybody gets stuff, and everybody has more or less than somebody else. And it doesn't matter how much stuff you have, it's what you did with it. And the more you give away, the more you're pleased and rewarded by the Lord, right? And so we don't need to teach critical race theory in schools. We need to send youth pastors and evangelists into the schools to get these kids born again. Because once they realize and accept the love of God in their life, they're going to want to love everybody. They're going to do good to those that hate you. Bless those that curse you, right? Turn the other cheek. They're going to want to give because they've been forgiven. So it's not a hardware problem. It's a software problem. It's not a skin color problem. It's a thinking problem. And then you have, what do you do with Ezekiel? 18:20, the son shall not bear the iniquity of the father. The righteous of the righteous, righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. In other words, you don't make the kids pay for a sin of the parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or somebody way in the past. Yet critical race theory says this little kid has to forever pay for the sins of somebody they've never met for the rest of their life, and you can never do enough. It's a religion of works in which you can never do enough, and it's moving goalposts because it's more and more, and you're just a terrible person, and you'll forever be a terrible person. That's not the gospel. The gospel is, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Forgive our trespasses as we, notice that word as we, to the exact degree. And if you're not forgiving others the way you want to be forgiven, you will not be forgiven. So all those that are harboring grudges and are not forgiving, they're not going to go to heaven. Jesus was the example of a totally innocent person being treated absolutely unjustly and terrible. And how did he respond? He forgave. And if he is our Lord and our Master, and we're supposed to copy him, we have to forgive everybody of every offense they've done against us and not make them pay. So there's a parable. The kingdom of heaven is a certain man settle accounts with his servants, and he had one servant that owed him 10,000 talents, and he's not able to pay, and he begs, and the master forgives him. And then the guy goes out, and he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, a little bit, and turns him over, grabs him by the throat, pay what you owe. He fell down and said, oh, beg, have patience with me. And anyway, he says no. And then word gets to the master. The master said, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had on you? And then it says, and his master was angry, delivered him to the torturers. And it says, so my heavenly Father also will do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother's trespasses. You have to forgive everybody of every trespass if you want to be forgiven yours. God's not a respecter of persons. Satan, book of Job, accuses God of being unjust because he's treating some people. You're treating Job better than the others because you got a hedge around him. And God said, no, I don't. Have at him, you know. So if God shows partiality and is treating one group more than another, he's breaking his own law. Because Leviticus says, you shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. So God himself does not show partiality. We cannot show partiality. He loves everybody the same. We need to love everybody the same. Now what about, this is a question that needs to be addressed. Did you know President Obama's mother was white? Is he going to cancel himself? Is he going to pay reparations to himself? Now, this is serious. Right now, we have a white male athlete that is swimming and competing against females and taking all their medals. He's just identifying with them. He just feels like it. And now, there's an article where he said he felt like that he was the Jackie Robinson of transgendered athletes. Now he's identifying with a black athlete. So here we have a biological male identifying as a transgendered female black athlete. Should he get paid reparations? I mean, where's this going to end? Wokeism definition of sin is different than biblical morality. They're saying if you have to embrace every different type of sexual activity, otherwise you've committed a broken sin, a woke sin. But Jesus says in the beginning, God made them male and female. And anyway, I have a whole section in my book on how to brainwash a nation. Don't have time to go through it. It begins with marketing and you're selling products. And then there's Crisco when nobody knows anything about it. And yet, it's made out of cottonseed oil. But yet they had these slick ad campaigns. And so now people are using a product that they know nothing about. And then you add to that the fear. And so 1938 radio drama War of the Worlds. I have Orson Welles. We interrupt this program to announce that New Jersey is being invaded by Martians. And the country freaks out. And this became a phenomenon where you had fear. So now you can motivate people because they see other people buying a product and because of fear. And we see movies about how to, psychological twisted ones. We have an Army and the Air Force motion picture service. So why did they do that? They realized the power in this. And then you have Joseph Goebbels, Germany, minister of propaganda, and the fear of the war, and people wanting to do what they see others do. He orchestrates these Colosseum events with 100,000 people. And then they begin to give the Hitler salute in the front. And it begins to work its way back like a wave in a football game, right? And it comes all the way back, and everybody sees everybody else giving it, and they feel pressured to give it because there is a human dynamic of wanting to fit in. And so it's manipulating the human desire to fit in because they're now controlling all the media and the Facebook and the Twitter and everything. And anyway, so there's other experiments, and I don't have time to go through this. There's, I think it was Dr. Burns or Calvin mentioned Antonio Gramsci, Long March Through the Institutions. He says, you can't defeat America on the battlefield, so you got to rot it from within. And we've got the 7 pillars of influence, and his idea was you get them in reverse. And so here we have, the civilized world has been thoroughly saturated with Christianity for 2,000 years. Basically, a Judeo-Christian belief focuses on the individual, where socialism focuses on the group. Any country grounded in Judeo-Christian values cannot be overthrown until the roots are cut. Socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In this new order, socialism will triumph first by capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media. And so that's this deconstruction where I talked about it a little bit, where you manipulate the history, and I'll get through this. I'm cutting through stuff because I see Darren standing over there, and I know I'm probably over time, and so I appreciate your patience with me. 1984, a book written by George Orwell in 1948. New invention was pneumatic tubes, and so he's got a job working for the government, the Ministry of Truth, but all he does is lies. And he gets a pneumatic tube with the history he's supposed to edit, he makes the changes, and he sticks the original history down another pneumatic tube, and it's sucked down into the incinerator in the basement. It's called the memory hole, right? And he says, every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. I know, of course, that the past is falsified, but it would never be possible for me to prove it, even when I did the falsification myself. After the thing is done, no evidence remains. The only evidence is inside my own mind. And I don't know that any other human being shares my memories. Everything faded into mist. The past was erased. The erasure was forgotten. The lie became truth. If there's no God, there's no absolute right and wrong. What's wrong with twisting history to push your agenda? And anyway, Karl Clausewitz, 19th century military theorist, said the purpose of war is to force your opponent to submit to your will. And Sun Tzu's Art of War said, supreme excellence in a commander consists in breaking your enemy's resistance without a fight. So you want to break their will without a fight. And so this began to focus on psychologically freaking out your enemy, making them think you're more powerful than you are, and it's messing with their minds. And we did this during World War II, dropping pamphlets down, saying, oh, you're already lost. And they did it to us in Japan with Tokyo Rose, broadcasting across the Pacific. You Americans are terrible. But now it's called 5th generation warfare, where you get your enemy to surrender without them even being aware that they're in a fight. I mean, why even make them aware that there's a fight? You just take away their freedoms. And so we began to see Carl Bernstein, Watergate reporter, had an article of the CIA in the media. He identified the CIA had 400 people that they paid in all the major news media who were taking their government. And under Obama and Eric Holder, they removed some law that was to prevent the government from using propaganda on its own people. But they said if they felt like it was an emergency, they could. But now we see this manipulating of the public consensus. And during the Korean War, they rescued the prisoners. And these guys went in loving America, came out hating America. And they said, what happened? They called it brainwashing. Buddhist term of cleansing the mind, but use emotional reset. You'd isolate these prisoners. Isolation and deprivation for months and months and months. So they just craved wanting to get back to normal, wanting to have friendships again. And then at that breaking point, they would bring them into a room with a half a dozen guys who had already caved. And they would say, before you could be accepted, you had to confess your whiteness, confess that you were part of the evil Western capitalist system. And when you finally did, you got this emotional reinforcement and you're now accepted into the group. And so they want to apply this nationally, have everybody go through a period of isolation and deprivation. So they just crave wanting to get back to normal. They say, okay, but before you can do that, you got to take this shot, and you got to do this, you got to give up this freedom, your privacy, and all this other kind of stuff. It's a manipulating of the human desire to want to fit in. And anyway, the kids do it in school. And then here's one, Ash conformity study, 1970s, college campuses. They pull 8 students into a room, 7 had been paid ahead of time to be actors. One was a naive participant. The teacher put 2 cards on the front desk. One had 1 line, the other 3 lines. And one by one, they'd go around the room, and the paid actors would convincingly say that the shorter line was equal to the first line. By the time it got around to the 8th naive participant, 30% of them would deny their own eyes to fit in with the group. Now, if only one objected, it went from 30% down to 5%. But they began to study this, called the spiral sign. People will self-center their views if they think they are in the minority. Beginning of the country, most of the people were Christian, and non-Christians would adopt Christian behavior because they wanted to fit in with the Christian society. But now they've co-opted these public opinion molding. And the power of manipulating the group, Peter tells Jesus he'll never deny him. A couple hours later, Peter's around a fire. Girl gets in his face. You were with Jesus. Peter looks over at the guys around the fire. They're all looking at him, about to kick him out of their group around the fire. And he says, I never met the guy. 3 times. Not wanting to be kicked out of this group of strangers around a fire. It's a powerful thing. But Jesus calls us to forsake the fear of man and only fear God. That's what's happening right now. Is people say, we're brought to a point. Are you drawing your identity of acceptance or rejection from man, honor, shame culture, or are you only getting it from God? Now, after the resurrection, Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, stand up to the Sanhedrin. They said, we told you not to speak in his name. And he says, we must obey God rather than men. In other words, hey, I've taken this step. I don't care what people say about me or what they post about me or what they lie about me or do on TV or the internet. All I care about is what Jesus says about me. And I love this last couple pictures. Giants pitcher Sam Coonrod, only one not to kneel. They asked him why. He goes, I'm a Christian, so I just believe that I can't kneel before anything besides God. Orlando Magic forward Jonathan Isaac, only one not to kneel. They asked him afterwards, he goes, all lives are supported through the gospel. Everyone is made in the image of God. And we all share in his glory. Critical race theory is counter the gospel. And it's our turn to make ourselves of no reputation and stand up for the Lord. Anyway, I'll end with that. God bless you.